Yeah, he's calling. Okay. If everybody could find their seats, we're going to get started. Okay. This is your chance to order a drink or another bite. Right? Pamyang. Okay. Good evening, and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. My name is Phil Robertson. I'm an FCCT board member, and we're here to talk about what's going to happen next. But before we get into the panel and the predictions about what Trump will mean for the U.S., Thailand, and the world, I want to tell you a little bit about several events that are coming up at the FCCT. First of all, on Wednesday the 22nd, this Wednesday, we'll have a program called Forever Stuck in Limbo, Uyghurs in Thai Immigration Detention, about the 48 Uyghurs who have been held for more than a decade in Thai detention. I don't know if people have been following the news, but there's been threats to send them back to China this week. It'll be a very timely panel. We'll have a New York Times correspondent who's written extensively about this, as well as several parliamentarians, NGO activists, and others. That will be on the 22nd at 7 p.m. On Friday the 24th at 12:15 p.m., we're going to have a lunch talk by Amitav Acharya talking about could Burma turn a corner in 2025. He's just come out with a new book, Tragic Nation Burma, Why and How Democracy Failed, and he will be at the club at 12:15 on the 24th of January. And that evening, the 24th of January, we will also have our monthly FCCT pub trivia. So I encourage you to form a team, come down, win prizes, have fun on Friday the 24th at 7 p.m. So that's coming up at the FCCT. Now, today we're talking about a very serious situation. In just several hours, Donald Trump will be again inaugurated as the President of the United States. That will actually be coming at 12 p.m., 12 midnight here. In media interviews and via his true social media account, he's vowed to implement a host of new measures, which you're going to hear about from various different panelists today. Needless to say, these policies are going to be a lot different than his predecessor, Joe Biden's. Things like tariffs on trading partners, rounding up millions of illegal migrants, quitting the Paris Climate Change Agreement again, bringing about some sort of peace agreement in 24 hours in Ukraine. I think that's what he's promised. Restarting negotiations with his friend Kim Jong-un in North Korea, and possibly retaliating against domestic and international political opponents. These are some of the things that Donald Trump has said on social media, not necessarily just talking about those things, but also Greenland, Canada, the Panama Canal. Needless to say, there's a lot to unpack here about what Donald Trump will mean for the USA, for Thailand, for Asia and the region, and we're joined by an exemplary panel tonight to help try to unpack these issues. We're first going to hear from Kun Kantati Supamongkon, who's a former Thai foreign minister and an academic. Next, then, we'll hear from Titinan Pongsarak, who's a visiting professor at Southeast Asia Center at the London School of Economics. He's on leave from his regular job at Chula at the Faculty of Political Science. And then we'll hear next from Keith Richburg, who's editorial writer and columnist for the Washington Post. And finally, we'll hear from Kun Pawida Pananon, who's the professor of international business at Thammasat University, and she's a visiting fellow from the Henley Business School at the University of Reading in the UK. So to kick things off, we're going to start with Dr. Kantati, who's joining us from Singapore. We greatly appreciate you making time to join us here, and we welcome your thoughts. Please proceed. Oh, we need sound. ไม่มีเสียง Oh, unmute yourself, please.
Phil?
Got
Can
it.
you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this very timely conference that we have, the panel discussion. And I am in Singapore, but I'm on my way to New York City tomorrow. So I will be arriving after the inauguration. I hope I get in. But anyway, I was recently in the US, and I sense that the country is actually now more than ever divided, continue to be divided. There was a sigh of relief when Trump won among most people. And that was because violence was avoided. Given the fact that Trump had a choice, if he did not win, he probably would go to prison. So the assumption was that if he had lost, he would not have accepted the loss, and he would have aroused his supporters to the point of violence. So that was the real fear. I knew so many Americans who left the country thinking that something like that would happen. So they came back after Trump won, ironically. And of course, the transition of power will be rather orderly. Now that it's a fait accompli that Trump will become the next president, we have another different situation. We have now the unprecedented application of Americans applying for foreign citizenship. That is continuing. That has been continuing actually before the elections and after the elections. I heard that so many European countries and other countries are receiving applications from Americans. I understand that numerous numbers of State Department officials are planning to resign. So you have quite an seemingly unpredictable situation, but this is predictable. Resignations will probably come. Some academics, very senior academics, expected a worst case scenario in which things would get so bad that the US may experience a coup d'etat. That was floated in America. Now, the situation at this point is that what is the message America is sending to the world? Is America saying that democracy and politics are above the law? This is a big question mark. Is it the fact that in America now, a convicted criminal can use elections victory to go through the process of criminal cleansing? And then you contrast that with the situation in South Korea, where the sitting president had been accused of resurrection, and he has been arrested, and he faces prison, either long-term, maybe a lifetime in prison, or even execution. So you have a contrast in which a lot of questions are floating around. What we will see is what has been called the unhinged Trump. So he has a mandate now. He controls the two houses. He will probably likely lead to the continued weakening of the liberal international order, further weakening of NATO. But in that sense, some members of NATO maybe, or some in the secretariat of NATO may be a bit happy because Trump has actually created incentives for more members to pay up to their 2% of the GDP on defense, and that may go up too. So there's a mixed picture there, but you sense a weakening of NATO. It is a paradigm shift that is quite going to be in uncharted waters. You now have a situation in which China will play the role of the protector of the environment, protector of free trade, and the US will be on the other side. Now, Phil had mentioned the reference to Trump suggesting that Canada should be the 51st state of the US, Greenland should belong to the United States, and of course the Panama Canal. Well, are we seeing the US renewed acceptance of the principle of territorial expansion? Because this sounds very familiar to the arguments that had been used, of course, by Russia as well as others, maybe suggesting that national security requires the additional land. So that is another question mark. And of course, some people are wondering about US leadership of the free world. These are all up in the air. And we are not sure where we're actually heading. Now, with the acceptance of the principle of territorial expansion, maybe a message would then go to China too, regarding Taiwan. That is also something that is worthy to be a bit concerned about. But I'm not so concerned about an actual use of force by the Chinese, because there are other elements which may make that not worthwhile for China at this point. So you have an unprecedented situation in which before, when we had Trump 1, we had some members of the cabinet who were considered to be the adults in the room. I have not been able to identify one for this coming cabinet. Now, the good news, though, the good news is that with war fatigue, I feel strongly that the Ukraine war will end, maybe not in 24 hours, but it will end. Putin will probably have the ability to control 20% of Ukraine territory, at least to start with. And autonomous regions could be another concept. But I sense that Trump having this situation ripe, and Putin will probably see it as an opportunity, because there is a stalemate. With this stalemate, the military actions can no longer bring too much more returns. So it is time to find an off-ramp. And the Biden administration had no real plan to end the war. So now with Trump, the good news is that the war will probably end soon. And the same applies to Gaza. We saw now the ceasefire. I had predicted that months ago that this will come. There is a war fatigue there too, and I think the Israeli Prime Minister realizes that there's so much, this is as much the military can do, and not much further can be achieved outside of killing more people. So it is maybe time for Netanyahu to give Trump his friend a gift. And of course, it is coming about at this point in time. So good news about immediate peace. And it seems that we will probably be able to achieve peace in the near future. Now, Trump wants to be seen as a peacemaker, and so the two examples will probably enable him to do that. But one wonders how well thought out are his policies, and he has said many things off the cuff. Some are to a degree thought out, but some maybe not. I will give you an example. Back in 2017, when he was having a major conflict with Kim Jong-un, calling Kim Jong-un the little rocket man, he actually sent the US Navy to the coast, the Korean Peninsula, and a potential war was possible, maybe from some accidental maneuvers, but it was close. And so Trump sent his special envoy to this region, and one came, of course, the envoy came to Thailand, met with Prime Minister Prayut with a strong message: don't talk to the North Koreans, isolate them, no communication, don't talk to them, don't go, no, nothing, just please stop for now. But then that same representative asked to see me and said to me, you know, we really have no other channels to communicate with the North Koreans, and it is so dangerous now. We need your help. And they remembered my role in trying to get the North Koreans back into the six-party talks a few times when I was foreign minister. So he said that no other channels now available. So please send some messages, even travel there if you can. I sent some messages, and I was pleased to see that about 3 weeks later, in January, things started to improve, and then we had the Winter Olympics in South Korea, and then the love affair between Trump and Kim Jong-un. So the example there suggested to me that sometimes things could go out of hand because they may not have been thought through in the way that they should. I won't touch so much the tariffs because other panelists will probably mention that. But in view of the time, I think that Trump will see things in personal terms. He was against TikTok during his first term, but now he has embraced TikTok because he felt that TikTok had been a vehicle to get him more votes. So the personal terms that Trump sees things with his transactional focus should be something to consider when we continue to deal with the new Trump administration. Now, I just wanted to end by saying that my advice is simply to say that expect the worst and you will be pleasantly surprised. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Next, we're going to turn to Dr. Titinan for his analysis of the situation. We're gonna go through each of the speakers, and then at the end we'll have question and answer. So think about the questions you want to ask and who you want to ask them to, because there will be opportunities for questions after the panel finishes their presentations. Ajahn Jay, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'll just start with a couple of caveats and disclaimers. So first, I think that the current Trump administration should be called second administration of Trump, not 2.0. I'm very annoyed seeing this 2.0. You know, you have Windows 1 to 2, 2 to 3. It gets better, right? World War I, you don't call the World War 2.0. It's Second World War. So I think it's not linear. So my first kind of caveat disclaimer is that it's Trump 2, second administration of Donald Trump. Um, this is a big kind of, I always have to say this every time that, analyzing things the way they are and not the way that I would like them to be is a major distinction. I have my American uncle here from California, Uncle Bob, to make sure that I don't say anything nice about Trump. I don't intend to. I never intend to. I don't think he's a very nice man. But seeing him the way he is, not the way that we would like him to be or the way we hate him or dislike him, despise him, they are distinctly different. So analyzing Trump on the merits. The reason that we are kind of anxious and uneasy, apprehensive, really just shaken by the re-inauguration today is because we are, most of us, I think some of the people here are very young, but in my generation, and most of the people here, I think, are the beneficiaries, byproducts, offspring of the rules-based liberal international order that he is hastening, whose demise he is hastening. Now, Donald Trump has not caused the demise of the breakdown of the rules-based liberal international order, but he's going to accelerate it. So he's not the cause, he's not even the catalyst, but he's going to make it a lot worse. But it's been entrained for some time. So I think this is something that we have to also grapple with. When you are the establishment, when you are the incumbency, when you benefit from incumbency and establishment, the way that things work, and you have someone that comes in and upend, overturn the system, it's going to cause a lot of convulsions, and you're going to hate it. It happened in Thailand 20 years ago. A certain prime minister came in, he had a big game for Thailand, and he was despised, and eventually he was overthrown and deposed. But Donald Trump doesn't work that way in the U.S. But this is why I think underpinning our anxieties and uneasiness is this: we're seeing the world that we have become accustomed to being overturned. Whether that be international trade, World Trade Organization, whether that be the UN, IMF, everything that he says, he's overturning everything, right? We say he's transactional, bilateral, and all that. That's against the established rules-based liberal international order. So we don't like that. That's why I think we have a hard time coming to terms, coming to grips with this guy. Now, I have just a little bit of I normally don't do this PowerPoint kind of slides, but I do have a indicative, illustrative slide. I just want you to, just a little exercise, 30 seconds, 1 minute. If you read these quotes, they're almost prophetic and prescient. The movement behind Trump's today, re-inauguration. So if you read, years after the Marshall Plan, it is time Europe conscripted the soldiers for its own defense. If you read, but America can only lead the world into the 21st century if she is not saddled down by all the baggage piled up in the 20th. For years, the U.S. has been drained of wealth and power by wars, cold and hot. Much of that expenditure of blood and treasure was a necessary investment. Much was not, and on and on. But I'll just say how other people rule themselves is their own business. To call it a vital interest of the U.S. is to contradict history and common sense, and for the Republic to seek to dictate what kind of regime each should have is a formula for interminable meddling and endless conflict. That has a lot of implications for Myanmar and for Thailand. And now he's quoting Walter Lippmann, who wrote in 1943, if we construct our foreign policy on some kind of abstract theory of rights and duties, we shall build castles in the air. We shall formulate policies which, in fact, the nation will not support with its blood, its sweat, and its tears. That's Walter Lippmann saying. And finally, he says, enlightened nationalism was Mr. Lippmann's idea of a foreign policy to protect America's true national interests. What we need is a new nationalism, a new patriotism, new foreign policy, puts America first, and not only first, but second and third. Now, this sounds very Trumpian, but but it actually comes from Patrick Buchanan in 1990. If you live around, you work long enough, things come back in vogue, even fashioned. But of course, I was digging up these old journals that I had from the 1980s. And I see this Buchanan. I knew that he was writing something like this. 1990, the National Interest at that time was a quarterly journal, and he wrote this. He wrote other things, and in 2012, there's a whole biography of him and everything. But he was actually way before Trump. ขออันสุดท้ายเลยครับ And some years afterwards, and I won't read all of this, but it's Samuel P. Huntington saying that the U.S. is a nation not of immigrants. It's a nation of settlers and descendants of settlers and slaves, right? So a book that I'm rereading, 2004, Sam Huntington was best known for The Clash of Civilizations, the remaking of the world order. People know him for that. But in fact, the last book he wrote, he published before he died in 2008 was Who Are We? It was about American national identity, right? And this is what is at the heart of the Trump movement. So I've kind of summarized some of this. If you Googled the intellectual framework behind Trump's ascent in the global Asia from last month, in December, I included a lot of this Buchanan and Huntingtonian, but also Sarah Palin in 2015 said, if you live in America, you need to speak American, not just English. You need to speak American. Now we chuckled and we laughed and we joked and we ridiculed, but in fact this movement, พอแล้วครับขอบคุณมากครับขอบคุณมาก so that's just indicative, but this movement has been around for some time. I saw it growing up and I thought, wow, it's taken them. There used to be the fringe. In 1992, Pat Buchanan ran for the Republican primary against George Herbert Walker Bush. He lost by a mile. Right? He lost a lot by a big margin. But he made his point. At that time, nobody was listening. Very few people. America first. Make America great again. And it was the end of the Cold War. And it was the kind of inflection point for the US. And his premise was that America has done enough abroad. It has, won 2 world wars, first, second, won the Cold War, and it expended a lot of resources. It was tired. It was exhausted. And others have benefited at America's expense. The international system that America underwrote, propped up. Thailand used to get GSP privileges, the generalized system of preferences and all kinds of trade privileges, same with the so-called third world at that time. If you look at the GATT system was really backed and supported and propped up and underwritten really by the US, some by Europe. But, so 1988, 89, 1991, 92 was a pivotal time when this debate took place. And, of course, Buchanan lost. And Clinton came in 1990s. And then remember our emails that we used? That was about a big tech boom at that time. Globalization had a big run, had a really a spectacular run. Tech boom like we have today, but that earlier phase. So globalization led to increased global economic integration, trade investment, technology, borderless world, right? No borders, borderless world. And that had a good run for about 20, 25 years. I would say it's hard to pinpoint, but roughly 2012, 2015, but certainly correlated with China's rise, China's meteoric rise. China, if you can imagine, if you are in the US, right, you think like, who are these guys? They from nowhere. Even the 1980s was Japan was going to be number one, right? 1960s, 70s, China was still kind of starving. They had one-child policy. And this country, from 1991 to 2017, grew like 9% a year, right? And from nowhere, it rivaled the US. So a lot of people in the US, I think, they were seeing this. At the same time, there was this steady influxes of the immigrants. I was one of them. I remember I'm going to write about this very personal anecdote. Somebody told me in 1982 to go back to your own kind, a white kid across the schoolyard. I remember that well, It was a bit, but the surprising thing was the guy was a bit bigger than me. He wasn't being racist. He wasn't being aggressive. He was passive. He was just lamenting that America was being taken over by immigrants. And it was true. I grew up with lots and lots of Mexicans, right? With a lot of white people too. But over time, in 1924, they had an Immigration Act which imposed quotas on immigration. 1965, they repealed that. And so Thais, we call them Robin Hoods. You go study in America and you don't come back, you just keep working there. So this, I think, registered with a lot of Americans, and it kind of culminated in the 2010s, and then eventually behind Trump. So a movement. So, we talk about Trump. In fact, I see him as a kind of a culmination, maybe embodiment, end product of a broader movement that's been around since the 1990s, 2000s. And it's not the first time. If you look at US political history, this happens every 80 years or so. They have an inward-looking basis. So that's the first part of my talk. The second part, that's it. There's two parts. What is going to happen? So I think to understand what's going to happen in the US, you have to understand this movement, how it thinks, where it comes from, what it wants. To make America great again, so the assumption is that America is not great. Why is it not great? Well, all the other countries have caught up. The margins have been reduced. China is surpassing the US in AI. So to make America great again, they mean it, right? So at home, I think there will be nativism. I've written about this already, which means anti-immigration. I mean, the immigrants that are there, ironically, immigrants have been there a long time. They don't like the illegal immigrants. The immigrants have been there a long time, voted for Trump, right? I have relatives like that. And then abroad, there will be economic nationalism, mercantilism, they call it patriotism, but you can see the tariffs and mercantilism, the protectionism, not just tariffs, but non-tariff on technology. And the idea, I think, we'll see if it happens this way, but the idea, I think, that the Trump movement, so the US is still number one. But the margin, the gap has been reduced, has been closed. And at this rate, the US is going to not be number one in all areas anymore. So what they want to do is they want to hammer, suppress, pat it down the number two, which is China. And then to make sure that everyone goes down a little bit while the US stays up. And then that way they can increase the gap again. I think that, so make America great again, America first, I take this literally. It means a lot. I mean, and for policies that we're going to see it on Myanmar, the pro-democracy, the democracy agenda, they're not going to talk about very much. You can see Trump doesn't talk about democracy. So like Myanmar, Thailand, if there's another coup, General Prayut visited Trump, first term, October 2nd, 2017. This was the military government. The junta leader, guy who seized power in Thailand, was welcome at the White House, October 2nd, 2017. So Trump is not about democracy and autocracy. It's about, it's just like Buchanan said, you have your own regime, do what you want. But America will look, they will pursue its own interests. I think that, finally, I'll just say that I don't think it's going to be a blanket, sweeping blanket, generic protectionism, mercantilism. I think he'll look at different packages. And as a kind of dealer that he is, and he's very, very personalized, like Dr. Gandhi said, if you do something that catches his attention, the way he behaves, the way he operates and functions, personal diplomacy will matter a lot, but he'll look at these countries in packages. So for Vietnam, I think Vietnam will have a lot to be careful about, because Vietnam has the highest in Southeast Asia trade surplus with the US, 120 billion. Thailand, about 40 billion. I think Thailand, I was asking the military guys whether it's too late for us to, have we committed to buying the Gripens? We buy a little bit of F-16s, Trump would be happy with that. If Thai companies invest in the US, this is the time to do it. So in terms of packages, what you can offer, what you can give, what you can take, this will be how he operates. But we can bank on the prospect that the liberal rules-based international order that we've known it has been eroding for some time. Its breakdown will be imminent, and that will cause a lot of convulsions, and we're not going to like it because we've been beneficiaries of it, of the peace, prosperity over the last 80 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn Jay. I do also recall that when Prayut was going to Washington, D.C., he was told by Trump to stop in Seattle. And he said, why do I need to stop in Seattle? Go buy some Boeing planes. And he did. If you want a good, that was what he said. He was told if you wanted to have a successful White House visit, it would help if he went to Seattle first. So, personalized, each different group, each different organization, each different country dealt with as a bargaining opponent. So now we're going to turn to Keith Richburg. Keith, please give us your ideas about what's going to happen next.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for everybody for coming here to the FCCT, by the way. I'm honored to be here and glad to see so many people here on a Monday night. I guess we'll get them out before the inauguration actually happens if they want to go. Or you can stay here.
They can stay if they want and do tequila shots.
Or you can stay here if you want to at midnight. But and I'm really glad. Thank you, Kun Thich. I really, whenever I wanted to know what was going on in the region, I read Kun Thich Nan's articles and listen to you. So thank you very much for that. I'll still be calling you, by the way. I'm still a journalist, so I'll be calling you to quote you at some point. But I just want to give you my perspective as a editorial writer and columnist now for the Washington Post. I was a bureau chief out here in Southeast Asia for many years. Everything I say basically is my personal opinion, by the way. And in the Q&A section, I'm very happy to talk about anything you would like to talk about, including the Washington Post. It's been in the news a little bit lately.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, Trump being very personal, with the visit of Prayut going. A couple of just random thoughts from me as we get ready for this inauguration. First of all, as has been mentioned, including by Kun Kantati, the former foreign minister, and Kun Thich Nhat, Trump he's two things in his foreign policy, and this is what we have to watch out for. He's very personal. If he knows a leader and he sees them, they've talked together, it becomes a personal relationship. And number two, he's very transactional. He wants to know, what can I get from this? What do we get? What does America get? What do you, the planes, Boeing planes, what do you buy? What do you get? The personal aspect of that is very interesting because he's coming in as the second Trump term, Trump 47, not Trump 2.0. I won't say that. But, it's interesting that when I looked around Asia, most of the leaders were not here when Trump was president last time. You've got a new leader here in Thailand. You've got a new prime minister. You've got a new president in Indonesia. You've got a new prime minister in Malaysia with Anwar. You've got a new leader, and you've got new leadership in Vietnam, even in Cambodia, perhaps if you count Hun Manet as the new leader. I don't know. Hun Sen is still around. Japan's got a new prime minister, so he won't go golfing again with the former prime minister. If you look around the region, there's a lot of new faces around, so he's going to have to rebuild. It's not like he's coming in and going to be able to continue those relationships that he had before. One of the leaders who is here, one of the few leaders who's still around from when Trump left office last time, at the beginning of 2021, is Xi Jinping, and that's a bit of a fraught relationship. But when I look around the new administration coming in, I'm trying to figure out the implications for Asia. I look at who's going to be making Asia policy. And one of the things that's a little bit disorienting is the fact that most of the top management level senior civil servants in the State Department have been asked to resign, which is not particularly unusual, except that the fact that this time around, the Trump administration seems to be wanting to accept all of these resignations and put in their own people. And their own people are generally people who worked in the Trump administration from the time he was elected, from 2016 until 2020, so 2017 until 2021. So you've got a lot of resignations. All the top senior civil servants in the State Department in terms of management and all these things have all gone. They're going to be bringing in a lot of new people or new old people. And the people who I'm looking at who are coming back in are all what we call China hawks, people who are very kind of anti-China, tough on China, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, and as I look around, I don't see a whole lot of Southeast Asia experts in that group. I see a lot of China hands in that group. When I do look around, I see, unlike the former foreign minister who talked to us from Singapore, I do see one adult in the room, and that's Marco Rubio. Now, he's not somebody who I personally would probably agree with on most things. I probably wouldn't agree with him on many things, but I watched the confirmation hearings, and unlike the nominee for the Secretary of Defense, for example, he actually knew what ASEAN was, and he knew he knew what countries were in ASEAN. He talked very eloquently about the Uyghurs situation. And if you look back, and again, I mean, I'm not talking, I'm not a Marco Rubio fan. I'm not a Florida voter. I'm not sure I would have ever voted for him. But when I watched those confirmation hearings, I was saying, okay, there's going to be an adult in the room. There's going to be an adult helping make decisions about what's going on. Here's a guy who understands things. In the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he was very involved on a lot of issues involving Thailand, involving Myanmar, involving Cambodia, involving some of the things that we care about in this part of the world. He was also very involved in any issues involving human rights. And so I think, therefore, and again, I agree with you that President Joe Biden agenda of democracy promotion is probably going to get lowered in the Trump administration, but you will have a Marco Rubio there who has put this at his agenda. Religious freedom is another issue that Marco Rubio has been very, very keen on. Now, what I'm interested to see, and this is what we'll have to watch, is how much influence / power Marco Rubio has in a Trump administration. And one of the things that worries me a little bit about how much influence / power he might have in this administration is the Trump team so far has seemed to be appointing a lot of special envoys. There's a special envoy for the Middle East, a special envoy for Ukraine, you name it, and there's a special envoy being appointed for it. And to my mind, that kind of undercuts the role of the State Department, which used to be doing these things. Why do you need all these special envoys around when you've got diplomats and ambassadors in all these places? So we don't know what's going to happen, but and again, in every administration, there's going to be a little jockeying for position going on. But given I'm going to try to say this in a non-biased way, given the nominees for other positions like Defense Secretary and National Intelligence, which in my view may not be as versed in some issues, particularly in Asia, Marco Rubio, if he's aggressive and puts his elbows out, could actually have some influence. And I think that could be a good thing for this part of the world. The other thing that I want to point out is that what am I looking at? I'm looking at how the new administration is going to look at what Joe Biden put together in terms of the architecture of Asia, the strategic and security architecture. He reinforced the Quad, which was already kind of there. The Quad grouping, we know India, Japan, U.S., etc., and the AUKUS grouping, which is the British, Australia, U.S. grouping. Again, we know from the first Trump administration that he's not a big fan of alliances. However, we don't. The other thing we know that is that he does care about the rise of China. He does care about keeping America first, and he's worried about China. And so if he continues to invest in and try to reinvigorate these alliances, and don't forget, Biden was also able to get the first ever trilateral alliance between Japan, Korea, South Korea, and the United States at Camp David. So if the Trump administration wants to nurture these things and keep them going, that might feed into his desire to have a counter to China. But we don't know that. And again, I lean on this one more time. I'm not sure where Marco Rubio is going to come in on this. What I suspect, and again, we're looking at the inaugurations coming up in a few hours. What do I expect? I really expect the Trump administration is going to be subsumed with domestic issues for the first weeks or months of the incoming administration. But that's not to say that won't have an impact here. For example, the first thing they're going to do, they've talked about it, it's not me giving you any inside information, but immigration. They're going to come down hard on deportations, et cetera. But don't forget, I mean, this is, if we can look at, and the only template we have for what the second Trump administration will be, I didn't say Trump 2.0, but the only template we have is what Trump did in his first term. And I think he's learned a lot from the first term, and so he's going to be more efficient in the second term. But one thing we know is that immigration is going to be a top priority. We're going to see a lot of executive orders coming out on deportations. And what I suspect, and what might happen is we're going to see what was known as extreme vetting, that to get new people coming into the United States, it's going to be a very, very difficult process. And I can tell you that for a fact because I was at the time of the last Trump administration. I was teaching in Hong Kong U. I knew students of mine, former students now, who had visas for graduate schools and programs in the United States. They couldn't go because they couldn't get their visas vetted in time because of this extreme vetting. If you're a Thai student and you're planning on going to the U.S. in September, start now. Start now, because this is if you're from the South and you're a Muslim, start now. Extreme vetting, and I'm not making this up. Extreme vetting netted a lot of people who I personally know who could not get their visas, even though they had admissions applications from universities and scholarships and plane tickets bought, and they just could not get their visas in time. So that's one thing that could directly, even though it's a domestic issue, it's something that could directly impact what's going on here. In terms of other foreign policy issues that I'm looking at, again, someone already mentioned North Korea. President Trump and Kim Jong-un fell in love. We don't know if the love affair is going to be rekindled or not. Let's all hope it does. Kim Jong-un is closer to, breakout nuclear weapons. He's already developed more. He's already done some testing with firing things in the Sea of Japan than when Trump left office. There's a new dynamic at play here, and I don't know how this is going to play itself out, but you've now got North Korea in an informal alliance with China, Russia, Iran, etc., in this axis of resistance, or whatever you want to call it. There are North Korean troops now in Ukraine. President Trump has promised us he's going to come up to an end to the war in Ukraine. How is that going to figure into all of this? This didn't exist when he was there before. Now he's not going to be able to deal as he did before with Putin here, Xi Jinping here, Kim Jong-un with his love letters, the Iranians over here which he cut off the Iran nuclear deal. They are now in an axis of some sort. Now, a good strategic thinker might be able to pull that all together and say, let's come up with some kind of a grand bargain, a strategic way to deal with all of this. Let's hope that there are grand strategic thinkers who are thinking that way. Okay. The other thing that I'm looking at, and I'm very curious to hear from our other speakers, maybe in the Q&A section as well, is the BRICS meetings, the BRICS organization, which I must admit, I've covered one of the early BRICS meetings that took place on Hainan Island in China many years ago. BRICS is now being expanded. BRICS is the organization that originally started out, given the name, was Brazil, Russia, China, who
India,
else is
China.
BRICS? And India.
South Africa. Yeah.
And South Africa was joined in later. The BRICS organization has now expanded. The BRICS organization now includes Iran. It now includes Ethiopia. And it now includes, I believe, Indonesia has said they're going to join BRICS. And I believe Thailand and Malaysia have been invited to join. They're considering joining. They're getting some kind of a partnership. We have talked in some of the earlier presentations about the kind of Western-led architecture, the financial system, the World Bank, the Bretton Woods system, and how. But the Trump administration, President Trump himself, has said anybody who's in BRICS who's going to try to do away with the U.S. dollar as the currency, the global currency, is going to be in trouble. So I really am interested to see, number one, why the Southeast Asian nations who are trying to balance between China and the U.S. think that they should be able to join BRICS, and then what impact that might be on the incoming Trump administration. Is that going to start with some hostility there or not? And so, and again, I think we can get into all of this in the Q&A part, so let me leave it at that, and then I'll move on to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Keith. Now we're going to have Kun Pawida to give her thoughts about what we're going to see next, particularly in the realm of economics and trade, but also politics as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil, and thank you, the FCCT, for inviting me. It's not easy to be the last speaker, especially to be the last speaker after three very enlightened and very experienced speakers. And it seems like tonight we start with disclaimer, everyone. So I think I'm going to start with a disclaimer and an anecdote. My disclaimer is that all I know about the future is that it's not here yet. And it never arrives. So all I can do is perhaps share with you my thought on what could be what happened in the realm of geoeconomics. And the second anecdote is today I had a long day, a panel talk in the morning, but a very different kind of talk. It was a talk called The Rise of Automation and Impacts on Jobs and Leadership. And the panelists were from various backgrounds, practitioner, firms, consultancy, and academic who are not leaders themselves. I told them that my disclaimer is that I never lead any organization in my life. Leading students is already difficult enough. So anyway, but the word that was a kind of a summary of that panel was there are two types of leadership. One is transformational, and the second is transactional. And it is actually agreed that in the world where automation, technology, and AI is leading the world, the type of leadership that we need is actually the kind of transformational, more focusing on nurturing talents and skills and all that. So it is kind of interesting to see the contrast of the different way of global leadership as opposed to the kind of the firm leadership or company leadership that we are seeing. And I just thought that it was interesting to share. That's just to start. And I'm just going to structure my talk in one definition, not what's the difference between 1.0 and 2.0 is, but definition of geopolitics and geoeconomics. And as I am sort of tasked to address the issue of geoeconomics, I would start with that. When I hear the title, and now we are talking a lot about geoeconomics, and I thought to myself that, for me, my field is international business. I study how firms expand overseas, multinationals, operation, and all that. So that's a geoeconomic decision. You have to know where you're going. Firms decide where they go. And trade, international trade, that's already geoeconomics. So why are we hearing geoeconomics being repeated more in these days and age? And I think I have to thanks to Dr. Tintinan cleaning out some of his vintage journal collection. So he shared with me one of the journal, the National Interest, also 1990. And then I came across an article that was written by Edward Ludwig, who is an American author, and he wrote a book on military strategy and all that. But he gave a definition that is very interesting of geoeconomics. And he said, quote, geoeconomics is the logic of war in the grammar of commerce. And that's very easy to understand. It's the logic of war in the grammar of commerce. And then he continued that while war is a zero-sum encounter by nature, commercial relations need not be, and indeed rarely have been. So these two quote, I find it very interesting, because what we are seeing, the definition then, back in 1990, compared to what we are seeing in today's geoeconomics, two things are very different. One is that the economic relationship has become part of the war. And we are seeing weaponized supply chain, weaponized tools to use the economic relationships against others. And second, this has also contrasted the idea that hot war is zero-sum, but economic relationship is not. We are starting to see that economic relationships, at least in the perspective of the US, has become a zero-sum game. When someone wins, some other lose, and usually is the US not wanting to see other people losing. At least the easiest thing is the tariff and the trade deficit. So those are some of the kind of the shifting logical idea behind the economic relationships that we are seeing. And for that definition, I think I have three takeaways to share with you. So I think the first takeaway is that we hear a lot about the word supply chain resilience. My field is I study a lot of global value chain, but I think it's easier to refer to supply chain because it's more kind of a everyday word that we hear. And I think we have heard a lot about what supply chain resilience means for different countries and different regions. And this is not new. It's not because of Trump becoming elected the second time. It's also, it start first perhaps more by COVID. We hear a lot about the resilience of supply chain of different things and what it means when supply chain and value chain are long and then being integrated across country. So what I would say about that is that I think we are shifting from the idea of the economic integration or relationship among economic partners that used to be driven more by efficiency to security-driven resilience. So what I mean by that is that when we were looking at globalization that Dr. Titinan mentioned, we thought of going overseas. Companies and industries think of going overseas because it's more efficient. The US firms that went first to invest in China thought so that it was efficient because China had a lot of resources. China was cheaper because of labor intensive and all that. And China also have a very big market. I remember one of the Thai conglomerate founder who said that China is the market that if you sell one toothpaste a day or one toothbrush a day, you already would be making money because of that size of market. So at that time, going overseas was an efficiency-driven decision. But right now, we are seeing that the economic relationship between countries are being driven more by security. And national security is driving other kind of concern on that. So what's the problem there? The problem is your security might not be the same as my security. So if you are looking at what America is looking, maybe it started first when you start to look at China as a rising power, as everybody mentioned. It was the policy that anything but China. Think of Huawei when that happened. Think of all the things that was kind of against China. But now we are also seeing the shift from anything but China going to anything but local, wanting companies to reshore, to come back to America, and using a lot of tools to influence company for that decision. So these are some of the shifting things that I think is becoming more accelerated, as Dr. Titinan said. It's not just Trump started, but it is something that would be accelerated. So for the US, it's okay, because US is a big market with large enough resource and large market to try to do everything within the country. But is that also the security for other countries? Take Thailand or Southeast Asia, for example. We are countries and regions that focus on export-oriented, and we welcome foreign direct investment. So if every foreign investor are tempted to go back to the US or to invest in the US, that would mean there would be a decline in foreign direct investment in Thailand, which is already happening. It's for other reasons, but this would also accelerate the decline of FDI or foreign direct investment in Thailand. So the first takeaway is that your security might not be the same as my security, and the EU might not also share the same idea because it's smaller countries that are being more integrated in the region. They probably don't want to do everything within their borders, and they probably cannot. So that's the first one. My second takeaway is that we are seeing the return of industrial policy. The easiest definition of industrial policy is government policy that influence the decision of firms to do what the government would like them to do. And we are seeing this being used, not just tariff, although today, after midnight, we might see 20% increase of tariff on Thailand and 100% or 60% on China. But there are also other policies that we are seeing. The Biden IRA Act or the CHIP Acts are some of the money that it is used domestically, but it is used that in the sense that it would influence how firms decide where to go. And that would affect the world in economic terms, because we were familiar with the kind of model that I mentioned earlier, the export-oriented model of Thailand. So to make it simple for that to understand, it's the kind of the model that make here, so there. You go find a place where you can do something cheaply, and you make it here, like in Thailand, make it here, and you sold there, back in the US, in the EU, and in Japan. But we are seeing this model being shifted from made here, sold here. That's the idea that the US wants to do. Everybody makes their semiconductor chip there and sell it there. So that's the kind of the model that might work for America, but for other countries, would it work? I think we are also seeing from the period of COVID and other things, what is happening is that the supply chain is not everything can be onshore or reshore back to one country, but we are seeing actually the shortening of supply chain. Everybody is looking for a kind of a shorter distance for their final product to travel. And that is why when you see the export of some countries that has rise up over the past few years. You see the example of Vietnam, you see Poland, you see Mexico, and then you see Brazil. And these are the kind of the connector economies that allow the economic model of, I would call, made here, sold around here. And that's the kind of the model that I think for countries in ASEAN, we need to think more of that rather than waiting for other countries and companies to come back here and relocate. I think Thailand is too complacent in thinking that we would be the winner of China plus one. But I think the China plus one is actually going to be China plus X, because we are looking at different countries that would be a kind of the feeder into the major market, as we see the rise of Mexico, although it will change tomorrow. But Poland is a case in point for access to the EU. So that we can see that supply chain is being weaponized, not just in the kind of industry that we see as important and strategic, like semiconductor. If you remember during COVID, there was also the face mask, trying to make people produce face masks. Vaccine is another example that is back from COVID years when everybody want to get on the vaccine production. So we also see that critical minerals are becoming the kind of the strategic ingredients and raw materials for all the industry that are green. So I think that's something that we are going to see more in the future, how different industry have to see where and when they would become subject to the kind of the security concern. And that could be a risk for the firm and for the country that has a lot of that. So that leads me to my third and last takeaway, which is in the world where we are seeing this kind of weaponized interdependencies and all this inter-geopolitical tension. I think it's very important how countries, industries, and firms understand where they are in the economic realm that they operate. So that means that if you are a firm, you need to understand where your firm stands in the supply chain of the industry. If you are the industry, you need to understand where other people are fitting in, other countries fit into your industries. And if you are countries, you also need to understand how your country can become significant and indispensable in the economic supply chain to create your own resilience that is based on your own national security. And with that, I think we are looking at a much more complex economic policy that would have to take into consideration not just product that, okay, this semiconductor is considered as strategic, But you have to understand beyond that sector what is the pros and cons for doing certain things. To give you an example, look at Thailand and automotive industry. Thailand wants to become the kind of the export and production hub for automotive. And that's why we are welcoming the Chinese, although we have long been the area where Japanese investors have long invested in, and with a very long and sophisticated supply chain. And the Thai government want to attract Chinese investor by allowing them to import the car with no tariff, and then also subsidizing the purchase of EV cars in for the people. So that would lead to some kind of a negative impact. For example, higher debt household, and also making the Japanese thinking that Thailand is a kind of a declining market, and they might consider divestment away from Thailand. So this sort of policy, even within the same sector, I think it needs to be looked at more clearly of what really we want to do. And I think that leads to a very important thing, which is institutional capacity. Because what I mean by institutional capacity is whether the government is aware of what we are dealing with in this kind of a geo-economic world that we live in. And I doubt that everybody would have time to really sit down and think about this, because the world is now being driven by the man who is the kind of godfather of transactional leadership. And I think I worry about that, especially for Thailand, that we are not so well known to be forward-looking, long-term thinking in terms of our political leadership. So that's my kind of looking into the crystal ball. And I only know, again, disclaimer, I could be all wrong, but I told you before that I only know about the future. The only thing I know is that it doesn't arrive yet. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So, I mean, it seems to me that we have an incredible number of challenges here. We have a transactional leadership. We have reshoring of industrial policy back to the United States, possibility of tariffs, abandoning human rights and democracy issues, leadership by tweet, or you can't, I don't know if you can call it a tweet anymore. I guess it's a truth. They call it a truth social. So, I mean, we're obviously looking at, as I was saying at the bar earlier, the crazy starts now. And with that comment, I want to open the floor for people to ask questions to our panelists. I think we should, we've got Dr. Kantati back in from Singapore. Please identify yourself, any affiliation that you have. Also indicate who you're directing the question to. Please ask questions. If you ask a statement, I'm going to cut you off. Is it on? Yep.
Peter Jansen, Business Times of Singapore. I have a really kind of silly question that drags the whole conversation back to Thailand. I just did a story on exports from Thailand, and I think Thailand's exports last year were very impressive, like $300 billion, and looking at the U.S. Census Bureau statistics, in the first 11 months of last year, Thailand was ranked number 10th in terms of its surplus with the United States. Vietnam maybe number 3, China number 1, yeah. I think, as we all know, Trump is transactional, and there's going to be a lot of negotiations that are going to get started on all these countries, not just Thailand, but Thailand is number 10, so it'll be up there in terms of negotiations. Thailand has its own transactional leader. It's got Kun Thaksin, who I always thought was Trump 16 years before Trump showed up in the United States, yeah? And Thaksin has all sorts of positions in this government. He's de facto leader of the Pheu Thai party. He's shadow prime minister. He's advisor to the ASEAN chair. I can't imagine Kun Thaksin isn't jumping at the bid or biting at the bid to get over to the United States and start talking to Donald Trump. I mean, they're two of the same peas of the same pod. I'm just wondering, I'll address this to Kun Jae. What do you think Thaksin's plan is here? And could he be a good negotiator? I mean, Thailand needs a good negotiator right now. Is Thaksin getting ready to do his thing?
We'll have Jay start with that, and then everybody else on the panel can have a crack at it too if they want.
Well, one thing you can say about Kun Thaksin is that he's very consistent. He's basically picking up where he left off 20 years ago, if you can believe it. He's been going around the country giving these 2-hour lectures about the Thai economy. He has ideas, even a vision. 20 years ago, it makes you realize that, I think this is now kind of a consensus. 20 years ago, he had a good game for Thailand. Not that he did not have conflicts of interest, corruption allegations, corruption convictions, but he did have a game for Thailand 20 years ago. I only wonder now, 20 years later, I mean, back in his time it was BlackBerry, right? Now it's like iPhone 15 or 16.
16.
So I listened to him. Some of the ideas are old, recycled ideas. A lot of the handouts, all the housing stuff, all the 10,000 baht, income redistribution, entertainment complex, new idea, but it's not a great value creation. He talked a little bit about AI, but didn't really expand into it. So I'm not sure. He has a tendency to kind of, speak his mind, and I think he has a big self-confidence, and he thinks he knows everything, and he has all the answers. But 20 years ago, it was on top of the game. This time, 20 years later, I'm not so sure, but it was better. I've listened and listened than what Prayut could have offered. I mean, I think General Prayut would not even know what AI is about. Frankly. So he is like Trump, Peter. I think they come from the same mold. I mean, just watch this week when President Trump has a few words with Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn. I think that we would sign after that. There'll be some sideline meetings, but I would not be surprised if there's a conversation, and if you get President Trump and former Prime Minister Thaksin in the same room, they would speak a lot of sense to each other. This is how they operate. This is their mindset. This is their way. I mean, they look at what's on the table. They would make deals, and that would be the end of it. Now the problem is with President Trump, and he has certain question marks about his vested interests. But the U.S. has very strong institutions of checks and balance, judiciary to keep things straight and narrow, right? But in Thailand, the institutions of checks and balance are much weaker, which means that when Tun Thaksin, if Dr. Thaksin engages in this kind of deal making with, and he is by all intents and purposes the Prime Minister of Thailand. Let's not hide around that fact. He is functionally, symbolically, functionally. Vividly, I mean, conspicuously, he is the Prime Minister. He's supposed to be a chairman. His daughter's CEO, but he actually is chairman and CEO, and she's just kind of the facade for the government. If he does this, the checks in Thailand are much weaker. So there'll be a lot of question marks. There'll be a lot of allegations about what he agrees to or signs up to for Thailand. But they do come from the same mold, and that puts Thailand in a different avenue, different channel. I think that Vietnam, Peter, you have to also bear in mind that when Trump left office, Vietnam has since doubled the trade surplus with the U.S. When Trump left office in 2021, I think trade surplus was about 26 billion. Now it's about 40 billion. So Trump will also pay attention to what it was when he was in his first term. So it hasn't skyrocketed. And I think there's a lot of, there'll be some deal-making space. And I think, Dr. Thaksin, former Prime Minister of Thailand, is a kind of a Donald Trump mindset, mold. And I think that they will talk before the actual talk between President Trump and Prime Minister Paetongtarn. And I think Thailand might be able to navigate better than its peers because of this. I think also, we now have the only game in town being the Pheu Thai-led government. The Prachachon Party is, sidelined and really systematically suppressed. It's interesting that if we can combine these two policy agendas, we really can see Thailand moving forward. But at least now, all we can hope, all we have to work with, is really the Thaksin-led government and the way that he sees the world economy, sees Thailand, and maybe the potential deals he will make on behalf of Thailand with the underlying conflicts of interest. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address Thaksin and his role going forward?
Yes, I can
Please do.
share thoughts. I wanted to let you know that Trump and Thaksin actually know one another rather well, actually. During the coup d'etat, which ousted the Thaksin government, Thaksin was in New York, and actually a member of the Trump family had meetings with him just before the coup. So there is an ongoing relationship. Thaksin also has been interested in playing a peacemaking role or a bridging role in international affairs within the region as well as beyond. He created the ACD, Asian Cooperation Dialogue, which embraces the understanding that Asia is not only Southeast Asia or South Asia or the Far East, but Asia encompasses countries like UAE, Oman, and actually Israel is in Asia. So ACD was designed by Thaksin to be addressing Asian situation as a whole. He has a vision regarding Peacemaker. I was actually building up our role. I wanted Thailand to have a constructive role in the situation on the Korean Peninsula. I wanted Thailand to help bridge the gap. And I was building that up and actually building it up and getting everything ready for Thaksin to assume that role further. So we were invited, Thaksin was invited to visit Pyongyang, and as well as the US, and going to the US first. So the plan, and I actually wrote the talking points here, was that Thaksin would say to President Bush, as an adult, I have been invited to Pyongyang. I'm going there in 3 weeks. Can we be of help to the US? That was what we wanted to say. But when that subject came up, it was during a longer conversation. And even though we had agreed that that would be the wording to use, I think in the conversation things changed a little bit. And in diplomacy, when you change a few things, things could be dramatically different. So instead of saying, I will be in Pyongyang in 3 weeks, and how can I help the US? He said, I've been invited to Pyongyang. Should I go? And Bush immediately said, oh, no. Those are tyrants. Don't go.
No.
It was aborted just because of the different presentations in the wording. But the desire to play a role in resolving international conflict is definitely there. And that includes the situation in Myanmar. Now, since I have the floor now, I just wanted to address Keith's question regarding the BRICS, and maybe Dr. Titinan or other panelists would like to enlarge on that. But to me, the enlarged BRICS is quite an interesting phenomenon. And the enlarged BRICS actually could have been a consequence of the Ukraine war. So let's start with the negotiations first. Negotiations between the U.S. and Putin before the war. I thought that Biden made a mistake, and by declaring in advance, publicly, that if Russia invaded Ukraine, since Ukraine is not a member of NATO, NATO or the US will not use force against Russia. Now, it doesn't mean that NATO or the US should use force, but I thought that in negotiations and in deterrence, one should not rule that out. Because once you rule that out so clearly, it takes away that deterrent aspect from Putin's risk calculation, risk and reward calculation. So I think in diplomacy, ambiguity is important in negotiations, and sometimes not clarity. And the other message was that Ukraine was determined to join NATO as soon as possible, although that was not likely. But that determination sent another message to Putin, saying that, oh, well, if Biden says, if the US says we are not going to use force in response to our invasion now, because Ukraine is not part of NATO, then now is the time, because Ukraine wants to be part of NATO. So the window of opportunity to invade was formed in that sense, maybe inadvertently. But with that situation, you had the decision to then tell Putin economic sanctions, and unprecedented economic sanctions would be our response and not military response. Well, Putin was not so afraid of that, because economic sanctions would not have come from the UN, because Russia wouldn't have allowed that. So it would be a partial economic sanctions. And he would find ways to get things done outside of that framework. But he saw the use of interdependence as more or less, you can say the word weaponized. He saw the weaponization of interdependence against him, against Russia. But in addition to that, the dollar-dominated currency, the global international reserve currency, also became used in the sanctions. The banking system, the Western system was all geared up to be used. So that led to the incentive for Putin and China to work together even more. And then it led to the enhancement of the idea of now we have to rush to find an alternative order, alternative currency. And they used BRICS, it seems, as a vehicle, because BRICS has potentially the ears of the global South, who many of whom are very much would see themselves as victims of globalization. And so ironically, that accelerated the expansion of BRICS. So that was something that I just wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, another question here. Please go ahead.
Yes, my name is Christopher Moore. I'm an associate member of the club. And I think this question is directed towards Keith Richburg. First of all, is it true that, to the rumor, that the Washington Post is going to be opening up a bureau in Greenland and Panama? Second question is what kind of changes do you think that legacy press will be making from Trump 1 to covering him in Trump 2? I'm thinking of the line out of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland with the White Queen saying to Alice, you know, before every day I have 6 impossible, crazy things to do before breakfast. So I think that that probably will be a mantra for the Trump administration, because Trump will be doing so many things that it will be very difficult for the press to cover them, to choose what is salient and what is not. So I'd be interested in your views on what kind of adjustments do you think will be made to news coverage and to editorial opinion about that coverage?
Thank you for the question, Christopher. By the way, if you don't know Christopher, he's a great novelist, so read his novels about Bangkok, the Vincent Calvino series, detective novels. First question, as far as I know, there are no plans to open a Greenland bureau, but I believe there may be somebody who covers Canada. I don't know. I grew up in Michigan, right on the border with Windsor, Ontario, so I would really love to see a Canadian bureau. There's going to be some news going on since Justin Trudeau is gone. You're going to have an election there. For last I checked, Canadians don't want to be a part of the U.S., so that could be interesting. Yeah, look, legacy media, and I can only speak for, what I believe would be the case of the Washington Post. By the way, I'm not a spokesman for the Washington Post, but I can tell you what I think is going on, which is that everybody's trying to figure out how to cover the new administration. And I think they made a mistake in the first administration in many ways. The problem with President Trump is he throws so much at you every day that if you're going to become outraged at every little thing, then you're going to be writing all kinds of things that don't really matter. And I think that was the same during the campaign. I mean, there's so much stuff coming out every day. If you just looked at his speech yesterday, he gave a rally at the Capital One Center where they play basketball in Washington. I mean, do you really want fact checkers to go through every line and say, but he made how many X number of untrue statements in that speech? Do you want to concentrate on the big things, or do you want to look at every little thing that comes out of that? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just saying that's one of the things they're going to have to deal with in the upcoming Trump administration. And look, the other thing that's important about this to note, and look, I've been with the Washington Post. I first started as a summer intern in the late 70s and then joined full-time when I graduated in 1980. So more than 40 years with newspapers and the Washington Post, my only employer other than Hong Kong University when I was teaching there. All those years, the hardest job I've ever had was being president of the Foreign Correspondents Club in Hong Kong. After the national security law came into effect and the Chinese Communist Party was in charge of Hong Kong. Why do I bring that up? Because look, when something like that happens, national security law comes in, you've got a new sheriff in town, it's now the Chinese Communist Party is running Hong Kong, and you're the Foreign Correspondents Club and you're the president of this board. You have to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to be the resistance? Are we going to fight? Or are we going to say, they're the boss, we're here, let's try to get along with the boss and see what we can do to continue to stay here, continue to operate, hold them to account when we can, et cetera. Now, and this is when Donald Trump is coming in. I think this is every media organization in America is now looking at this saying, okay, Trump was elected. He was elected this time by a majority of the popular vote and a big majority in the Electoral College. What do we do? Are we going to spend the next 4 years fighting? Or are we going to spend the next 4 years saying, okay, this guy's got a mandate to do what he said he was going to do? It was pretty clear cut. He said, I'm going to do these things. So what are you going to do? Are you going to go to the trenches if you're the media and say, we're going to fight every turn? Or are you going to go and say, let's just cover this as journalists would cover it, call him out when he's wrong, give credit when it's due, et cetera. Now, I think everybody's trying to figure out what to do. Now, some people are calling that appeasement, oh, you're bending over to Trump, et cetera. Other people are saying, look, this guy won. So do we know better? Should we fight at every turn? I don't know. And I think that is the real dilemma that the media finds itself in now. I think during the first 4 years, the media made itself part of the resistance. That they thought this guy wasn't legitimate. Let's look at every skeleton in the closet. Let's really go out all out and try to topple this regime through investigative reporting, et cetera. I think they should still continue investigative reporting and find, again, if there's stuff going on that's nefarious, et cetera, that should be reported. But on the other hand, should they go into it thinking we are part of the resistance, we are part of the opposition, et cetera? And I think everybody's trying to figure that role out for the legacy media. And I think that's happening now at CNN. I think it's happening everywhere else. Now, part of the issue that rolls into that is the fact that media organizations all over the world, and especially in the United States, are losing money. Why are they losing money? They're losing money to social media. They're losing money because young people don't buy newspapers anymore. They're losing money because the advertising model of old newspapers has collapsed. And so how do you, as a news organization, continue to get a mass audience to read your product if you're also going to become the resistance to 50% of the population? So I think they're really trying to figure that out. And I wish I had answers. I don't have any answers to how you figure that out. I think they have to stay true to what they do. They have to stay true to exposing wrongdoing and crime, et cetera, et cetera. But I think if they go into it with the mentality that we're going to oppose this guy at every turn because that's our job, then I don't think they're going to succeed. And so that's what I think. I think it's going to be a very, very tough situation. You're going to see a lot of legacy media trying to figure out what their role is and how do you cover this administration going forward.
Thank you, Keith.
Yep.
I think Americans, comedians will take care of Trump.
The late night host, if they don't end up on the blacklist, they'll be, yeah. Okay, next please, go ahead.
Lindsay Murdoch, freelance journalist from Australia. But Keith, just following on that, as a journalist, we've always came to the table to be covered, to do our work, to be fair, balanced, and accurate, and not to be influenced by anything else but that. To get it right and get it. So, are you saying that in the US legacy media at the moment, like the Washington Post or the New York Times, that there is a sense that they can't do that anymore?
Thanks, Lindsay. No, exact opposite. I think they need to be fair, accurate, and get it right, but also they have to be fair. And I think there was a little. Again, I mean, I'm think they're looking. If you look back to when Trump first took office, I think a lot of people thought that it was a fluke. He shouldn't be there. It was all Russian. He was put there by Putin. He was put there by James Comey. He was put there because of the email scandal. And let's expose this guy for a crook, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a lot of people in the U.S. turned off the legacy media because they thought the legacy media was biased. I personally don't think it was, but I think a lot of people thought that. And so I think they were looking for the legacy media to give the Trump supporters a fair shake. And I believe that people thought he wasn't getting a fair shake. I don't believe that's true, but I do think a lot of people did believe that. And again, when I look around, I lived in. I'm from Michigan. I moved to Washington D.C. to work for the Washington Post. I lived in New York. I lived in Bangkok and Hong Kong. I don't know anybody who voted for Trump. I look around. I look in this room. I don't know anybody who voted for Trump, but half the country did, which means that we weren't doing our jobs. We weren't getting out and talking to people who did vote for Trump. We weren't getting out and speaking to enough people and expanding the people we spoke with. And so I think we need to do a better job of getting out there and talking to more people who aren't like us and more people who care about things that we don't care about. And look, we care about all kinds of things. We care about, gender neutral bathrooms and all that, but a lot of people don't. And I think the media wasn't reflecting all of the various viewpoints that make up America in the media. And I think that's what we're talking about, is giving everybody a fair shake. Don't look down on people. I think the media and I'm part of the media, I think we kind of looked down on people. Anybody who voted for Trump had to be one of the despicables. You had to be kind of, racist. You had to be this or that or the other thing. And I think now they're at least coming to the conclusion that maybe we need to be a little bit more fair about how we report all viewpoints in America and not just assume that we're right, they're wrong, they're a bunch of assholes, they're a bunch of racists, they're a bunch of this or that, the other thing. And so again, I mean, it's just getting back to being what we should be, which is cover the story, be neutral, cover all sides fairly. And, you know, I taught at Hong Kong U, I taught journalism for a long time there, and I tried to always tell my students, yeah, that's a great story, but you didn't get the other side. What's the other side of this story? Make a point of just trying to make your stories as fair and balanced and as accurate as possible, because not everybody agrees with us, right? And again, as I said, I don't know anybody who voted. Well, that's not true. I know one person. I don't know most people. Most of my friends didn't vote for Donald Trump, but he won the majority of the popular vote. He won the Electoral College. He won every one of the swing states, which made me think that I wasn't reading enough. I wasn't talking to enough people. I didn't expand my circle of people enough. And so that's all we're saying is we have to, if we want to survive as legacy media, we need to go out and expand our horizons and expand our viewpoint and expand the people we talk to.
Okay, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Pat. I work in education, and I'm also a graduate student in international relations. Actually, I really like the point that you made about how you felt like no one actually voted for Trump. I just think that like in the US, there has been this thing called like, you know, like a cancel culture. So basically if like someone like say something different from like what you think, they're just gonna get canceled. And like no one really wanna get canceled because it's gonna affect your work and everything. Well, that's just my opinion, okay? So I have a question regarding the issue of China. Dr. Titinan actually mentioned about how like the US actually wants to suppress like China and like maybe we kind of like competing who's going to be number one like in terms of economy or technology. But I feel that China actually, like the US has been helping China a lot because we're actually hoping that China is going to be a democracy. But it seems like that is not going to happen. And as we see that China is becoming more and more of the opposite, as how like China silenced protesters in Hong Kong and the national law has been changed.
Can you ask your question, please?
Yeah, like so. Sorry about that. How do you think the Trump administration will deal with China? And like, I think this actually would be better for the U.S. because China actually has. Try to sabotage the U.S.
Okay. So how is the Trump administration going to deal with China?
In 2001 to 2000, the U.S. was the biggest supporter of China's entry into the World Trade Organization. China was a win-win for the U.S. to invest in. It was the factory of the world, biggest consumer market. So, China was everything. And U.S. companies went to China knowing that they would have to share technology, transfer technology, and they know that the Chinese would use that, copy that, and try to make it better. So the big question, your question, is that when did the U.S. and China, this row, this conflict, when did it start? And I think that I don't have a precise date, but roughly 2012, 13, I think correlated with Xi Jinping's rise, roughly. South China Sea. You can see before that it was all kind of very, smooth, very interdependent. So for the U.S. now, I think they feel, and I speak broadly in the U.S., they feel like, the U.S. feels like it's been ripped off. Donald Trump represents and exploits the politics of grievances. Like they feel like they have been taken advantage of. They've been grievous. They have, they have exhaustion. They've been hurt. They have suffered, and therefore they want payback. So if I were to describe what's going to come in the next 4 years, is the international politics of the Trump payback, which means that they'll want to get back from the system what they put into it that they feel has ripped them off. On China, it'll be very interesting. I mean, it could be that Trump and Xi Jinping will make a deal. It could very well be, but that will require
a lot of concessions on Xi Jinping's part, which I think China is not going to countenance. They're not going to accommodate. Short of that, there's going to be more confrontation. And I think that I don't think Trump is going to come in with a 60% across the board sweep of tariffs, but he'll be very hard, and we have a template. Look what he did in the first term. And the second term is going to be like that with some nuances, some intensification. And the Chinese are not stupid. They know what's coming. And I think that their disadvantage is that they rely more on the US market than the US relies on the Chinese market, which is a handicap for the Chinese. So it's going to get worse. And I don't think there's going to be a G2 US-China deal that kind of divides up the world. It's going to be a conflict. Whether it leads to some kind of a military conflict, I don't know. But this US-China is going to get worse.
Yeah,
I have an additional observation.
Yeah, please, you make your observation, then we'll hear from Keith. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sure. Well, I think that there are two Trumps. One is the Trump who is a champion of America first, and the other one is the Trump, the deal maker. It depends on which Trump shows up during critical moments. But with China, I think something to watch is Trump has expressed a desire to travel to China, and maybe the deal maker will travel to China. He actually sent a positive message to the Chinese president by inviting Xi Jinping to his inauguration, but we knew that that would not happen because Xi Jinping would not come to just be part of a gathering to honor Trump. But anyway, we'll see what happens if he does make that trip soon. But I do see that there are these two competing Trumps. Thank you.
Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, just very quickly, you hear a lot of anti-China rhetoric coming from Trump administration officials and coming out of Washington. If you go back to Michigan, where I'm from, my home state, Chinese are buying up old factories that were abandoned, and they're putting people to work, auto parts factories, et cetera. You go to, when I was in Hong Kong a few years ago, I met the governor of Nebraska, Republican, conservative Republican guy. What was he doing in Hong Kong? He was on his way to China because he said, we sell a lot of beef to China. Soybean farmers, they sell stuff to China. So you go outside of Washington, you get into the States, you get into the Midwest where I'm from. They don't see China as an enemy. They see China as a trade partner. And so therefore, I think there's going to be a little bit of a dichotomy between this harsh rhetoric coming out of Washington about China versus what you see in the States, especially in the Midwest.
Yeah.
If I may address that from the economic perspective, I think that there is a study done by DHL, Global Connectedness Index, and it has shown that, of all the flows that where countries are connected, trade flow, capital flow, information flow, and people's flow, China and the US remain the two countries that has very strong relationships on all those flows. It might be reduced compared to 2016, but it's still the two countries with the highest kind of connection. So why we hear the rhetoric nothing but China, but a lot of things are in the control of China that the US would need. For example, all the critical mineral, a lot of that are in China's control. So if you are seeing China retaliate by tariff on the US and export control of some of the ingredients, I think that would also hurt the US in the sense that it would be more expensive for the consumers and would be more difficult for American firms. And I think what would be interesting is when the Chinese firm EV are finding that they cannot export into the US, and now they are buying old Ford factory to produce in the US. And what would be the reaction to that? That would be an interesting, and I think that we might see some kind of a Huawei story repeated. Yes.
Well, yeah, the TikTok ownership
The
sort
TikTok
of thing.
ownership, and then you kind of, or you just don't allow the acquisition.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things also will be, just my personal view, is what happens with the South China Sea, and whether Trump is prepared to be, continuing the sort of Biden policy of aggressive patrolling and really sort of helping the Southeast Asian nations contest issues related to China's demand that they control all of South China Sea. So it'll be quite interesting. Okay, do we have another question?
Yes, hello. My name's Patty Parker. I've been reading that Trump is being strongly encouraged to stockpile Bitcoin. Does anyone have any opinion about whether this could affect the dollar and therefore world currencies?
Bitcoin. I know, by the way, I just would mention that one of the biggest donors to the Trump inauguration committee has been the Bitcoin companies. So, I mean, they're expecting a new horizon from Trump. Does anybody want to talk about Bitcoin?
I know nothing about Bitcoin.
Yeah. What I'll say one thing. I'll say one thing, which is that it appears to me that Trump saw a political advantage in championing Bitcoin. His sons were bringing in some guys who claimed that they were going to be able to create a Trump Bitcoin. So it was like a little bit like a vanity project for him. It's unclear whether any money is going to come out of this for Trump, but the bottom line is that the Bitcoin people see a significant difference in Trump compared to Biden. And it will be interesting to see whether Trump delivers or not. I mean, these are people who traditionally have not been engaged in politics. And now they're putting a lot of money and a lot of confidence behind Trump, that he's going to make some serious changes in the way that Bitcoin is regulated in the United States, and presumably not just Bitcoin, but all the cryptocurrencies. It's not just Bitcoin; it's cryptocurrency writ large, and how this plays out will matter not only for the United States but also for the world. So we'll see where it goes.
There's some frontiers that we're just entering. So cryptos would be one, AI would be another, and at an early stage, the regulatory framework, how it's regulated, is deeply consequential, far-reaching. So I think the fact that if you ask the opposite question, let's say the opposite, which means that let's say Trump shuts the door on cryptos, and then that would really kind of dampen the frontier. Similar with AI, but I think he's done the opposite, which is to really open up the door. So we'll see cryptos. I think the environment is very conducive for cryptos to grow. And so if you invest in Bitcoin or other cryptos, this is a good opportunity. And I think they might have a run. And then I don't know how they're going to start regulating it, but that's what I'm looking at. He's not shutting it down, but he's actually opening it up. And it's early stage, so the regulatory frameworks around cryptos and AI and so on, it's consequential what happens in the next, say, 18 months or so.
Yep. Please go ahead.
Yes, Sam Wright, club member. I would like to address the question of fair and balanced presentations at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand.
Okay.
I listened respectfully and have appreciated this panel, and it's nothing to do as a criticism of yourselves. You have your assessments and opinions, but Foreign Minister, when you refer to a convicted criminal going into the presidency and then not mention lawfare that got him that title, or Washington Post, sorry, you say that computer is a phony computer from Biden's son for a year. I thank the lady panelists. John, very respectful of a objective kind of analytic view, a breath of fresh air on the panel. Soon
do you have a
John,
question?
yeah, I'm trying to establish the basis for the question of prejudice that you have produced here.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Can I have the
get
question,
to it
please?
then?
Thanks.
Thank you. So, John Tititon, you wrote in the paper, Trump is detested by countless millions of us. So I assume that is not coming from an objective position of balance either. So the question to the moderator, when are we going to have a panel in which you have someone representing the majority here? I'm not criticizing anything anyone said. You have your analysis from a viewpoint. But the last panel we had that was to be impartial, you were selling Democratic shirts and hats in the back. Mr. Robinson, when are you going to meet a Republican as suggested by the Washington Post?
We've invited the Republicans to come.
Democrats are here.
Okay. Okay. No, we've invited the Republicans overseas to speak at that event. They were not available, and they had ample time to send someone. They did not send someone.
Well, I hate to correct you, but I called up the Republican leader myself after you said that, after that other meeting, and he says, "Are you kidding me? I get a call when I'm on an airplane going to Korea asking me to be on a panel and with no preparation."
Plenty of time in advance. So look, Sam.
So
let's have a conversation at the bar
where is
afterwards.
your fair and balanced representation tonight?
Well, if you
Where
want
is
to
the
join the
Republican
program
view
committee
on
and
this?
organize some
I
events,
am not
we're happy
being
to have this.
on
Thank you.
behalf of Republicans. I'm being on behalf of fair and balanced correspondence.
Well, thank you very much.
Is that your answer?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, please.
Yes, I believe that the content of my talk tonight has been fair and balanced as much as possible. I mentioned the positive aspects of Trump, potential for peace, among other things. Now, when I used the word convicted criminal, it was just a reflection of my respect for the U.S. justice system and based on jury. It was a decision in New York, and it was not a light decision. It went through the legal process. So that is a statement of fact. It's not a statement of siding with anyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last one. Yeah. Hello, Tom, FCC associate. A crystal ball question. Vietnam might seem like the obvious target number 2 on the Trump tariff hit list, so to speak, talking about surplus, all of that. But if we were trying to peer into the very subtle Trumpian tea leaves, he just spent $1.5 billion on a hotel and golf course development just north of Hanoi. I wonder what the possible role Vietnam might have in, let's say there is a full-on trade war between the US and China, maybe as a broker or as one of the adults in the room, not sure. But thinking about Vietnam, also considering, as Mr. Phil mentioned, the South China Sea. May Vietnam be more important as an asset, an ally, rather than an enemy in this kind of deglobalization?
Okay. So the role of Vietnam.
I start with the economic role of Vietnam, and then I leave the South China Sea to the political analysts in the room. I think the role of Vietnam in what we are seeing now is what I would call the connector economy. A lot of when I mentioned earlier that the amount of trade and capital flow that was reduced between China and the US, but what rose up is the export from countries that are like connected economies. And for those countries like Vietnam, not only their export to the US shot up, but their import from China also rose up as well. So in a way, that's a kind of indirect backdoor entry into the US using other countries. But I think that that has now been quite clear and obvious that Vietnam benefit because of it has is a member of the CPTPP, so you can export into the US more cheaply. But right now, with the kind of the tariff imposed on everyone, that would be something to consider. And Vietnam would be the country in Southeast Asia that would attract the most attention in terms of the amount of trade deficit that the US suffer against. So that's, I think, in terms of economics, there has been a role that Vietnam play. And mind you that, you know, companies cannot just change their plan overnight. When companies invest, it takes some time. So I think that Vietnam has now become the destination for a lot of investment in electronics, and that's not because of Trump, but because of the cluster of the companies that are there. So that still is an economic reason for Vietnam to be there as well. And Vietnam is actually trying hard to catch up with a lot of engineers per population and everything, much better than Thailand. So, you know, it's sad that Thailand has been kind of looking backward to see all our competitors kind of pass us forward. We should be looking at Malaysia, we should be looking at Singapore, who are the countries that are benefiting also from this kind of relocation. We're not talking about Singapore, but Singapore is actually the country that registered the highest in terms of startup that are shifting away from China to Singapore. So it's a lot more complex, but I think that it now would be kind of pros and cons that they have to look to Vietnam. But I refer the South China Sea to the rest of you.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
I won't speak on South China Sea. I'll just talk about Vietnam a little generally. Vietnam is one of the places I spent probably the most time outside of Thailand and the Philippines, starting in 1987 or so, and going back and forth, including just a few weeks ago, and I'll be going back. This year, by the way, is the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, which they call the unification of the country. And it's amazing that what's happened to Vietnam in these 50 years, that it's become this huge American ally. Why? Against China, in the geopolitical sense. And one of the things I find so fascinating about Vietnam is you still have a communist system in Vietnam. It's incredibly repressive for people who are environmental activists, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, you know, we have good relations there, but on the other, with China, you know, we're opposing these things. Why? And you know, I mentioned earlier when we were speaking that I think Marco Rubio is going to be absolutely fascinating as Secretary of State, because his parents came from Cuba, which is a communist country. So he's got this kind of anti-communist streak in his DNA. And I think when it comes to Vietnam, I'd like to see if he continues to have that kind of anti-communist streak in his DNA and is affected also by the anti-communist Vietnamese diaspora, the Viet Q, living in the United States as well, who don't want closer relationships with Vietnam as long as they continue to repress religious freedom. They don't let the Catholic Church appoint their own bishops, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm really fascinated to see how that relationship with Vietnam develops under the Trump administration.
Yeah. I would also add that the Vietnamese American community has been one of the most pro-Trump parts of the Asian diaspora in the United States. That you know, it has been consistently strongly pro-Trump.
Vietnam is an impressive country. So the question is whether Vietnam can be a kind of a broker, U.S.-China. You know, when I teach political economy of Thailand, right, the rule of thumb, very easy. You just say Vietnamese GDP economy is about half the size of Thailand. This has been the case for some years. In the next 5 years, at the rate of growth that we've been seeing, Vietnam's GDP is going to surpass Thailand. It's already a bigger market, you know. And Vietnam is impressive because it wants to be like China. It doesn't like China, but it needs China. And with the US and China, and this goes back to, say, BRICS, you know, Vietnam decided in the last minute not to join BRICS as a partner, not to be a member, but not to join as a partner. Because initially, 4 Southeast Asian countries were lined up for BRICS partnerships. Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. And in the end, Vietnam opted out. They took a pause, and because after Trump threatened to impose a 100% tariff on the BRICS country if they try to come up with an alternative currency, Vietnam said, okay, we step aside. We say, we will see. Let's watch and see. And then, so Malaysia joined, Indonesia and Thailand. And the last minute, Indonesia joined as full member. So now it's just Thailand and Malaysia as a partner. But there are also 8 other partners and 4 new members apart from Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, UAE. But some countries also took a pause, like Algeria, for example, Saudi Arabia. So moving forward, BRICS is going to be a good vehicle to judge whether Trump has gone too far. So if he goes too far, different economies and countries will take different alternative avenues to find their own kind of, cooperative endeavors, counter strategies, hedging. Vietnam, between US and China, I think sometimes they just want to stay below the radar, which means no news is good news. You think that sometimes if President Trump doesn't know you, it's good news. Because if he does know you, it could be trouble. It's like, say, Vietnam. So Vietnam, I think now they want to be below the radar. They know they're in trouble because of the trade surplus. And they know that US and China, South China Sea is a good indication. Vietnam has not supported the Philippines in any way in its confrontation, actually a military confrontation vis-a-vis China. So Vietnam, I say impressive because they have, and after 18 months of this domestic politics, I thought, what's going on in Vietnam? They've had this house cleaning and everything. They are now revamping the bureaucracy and getting rid of tens of thousands of bureaucrats. They're going to be more business friendly. They're going to be more attractive for investment. And I think that they've learned lessons also about China, also about US, and also about the Southeast Asian, like Thailand and so on. And as a latecomer, they have a big advantage. So they don't need to do internal combustion. It goes straight to EV. So they don't have our dilemma in Thailand. We want to be both. We need the internal combustion, the Japanese, from the late 1980s. But we also want the EVs from China. But Vietnam just go for the EVs. So I think very impressive country. I think that they will not play. I don't think they're interested in being a broker between US and China. I think they want to be the beneficiary of both sides.
Mm. So let me just turn to the panel and say if there's anyone wants to make some final last comments before we close, please do so. Dr. Kanati, anything to add?
I think I've covered it all. So
we thank you for joining us from Singapore. We greatly appreciate your time, and thank you so much for going to the extra trouble of joining us from afar.
Yes, but
we look forward to inviting you to the club in person soon.
Yes, I would love to consider that. Thank you very much. But I would echo the comments that at this point in time, when we had the first Trump administration, it was the administration was seen as aberration, not really the U.S., but it was an accident. But this time, it seems that it's confirmed that Trump is not an aberration. And so we have to live and be as objective as possible in viewing Trump and evaluating. And he is a reflection of what America now has to offer the world. So I look forward to seeing what will happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, just to close, I mean, just, you know, in a few hours when we watch the ceremonies going on in Washington, I can't help but think about how normal this all is. And I say that because, you know, 4 years ago it wasn't normal in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
You know, we had, first of all, we were in the middle of the pandemic. There was very little ceremony going on. Biden wore a mask for most of the time. There was very little, hoopla going on because most people were told don't come to the inauguration because of COVID. The president at the time, Donald Trump, didn't go to the inauguration. This time you're going to have Trump and Biden riding together in a limousine from the White House to the Capitol. This is the way it should be. It's all going to be very normal. And so, I think that's good for the country, for my country, the United States, and I think it's good for a projection in the world. We went through this turmoil of 4 years ago. We had the insurrection of January 6th. The Capitol was barricaded. There were literally barricades everywhere. You couldn't get near the Capitol. This is going to be other than the fact that it's really cold and they had to move it indoors. This is going to be relatively normal. So I think the guardrails have held, and we will see if they can continue to hold for the next 4 years.
Just have two parting comments. First, about fairness. I think that calling for fairness requires the capacity to be fair, which means that, I always have to give a caveat when I say countless millions dislike Trump because the people in my life don't like Trump. But in fact, I try to analyze Trump for the way that he is, the movement behind him. That's why we see him now being re-inaugurated. And, I think the politics of grievances are very powerful. Second, it worries me that, my old books and journals and the things I keep from 40 years ago are relevant again. So I studied political science. I thought comparative politics was kind of boring, so I studied international relations, and then that didn't answer the questions of the day. So I thought, international economics was it. So I studied international economics. Then I went into international political economy, globalization, international economic integration, the European Union, European project, single currency, and that was all great, international political economy. So I teach that. And now, the borderless world has borders again. Globalization is decelerated, being turned upside down, and I go back to look at international relations that I used to study, geopolitics that I used to like, and it's back. And personally, professionally, I mean, I love it, but for the world, it's not good, and I hope it doesn't keep going that way.
I guess if I have to say my last word is that we can look outside and we can see a lot of disruption and change that are going on in the world. And what's most important for countries, for us, for companies or whatever is to make ourselves the fittest that we can be. And I think that would also be a message for the Thai government to think that how can we the one that is indispensable in this kind of disruption world. And I think we need to go back to watch the movie Reality Bites.
Yes. Yes.
And one very last point for me. I think we will also see the strength of U.S. institutions, I think, in the next few years. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I hope so. And thank you very much to the entire panel for taking time to speak to us about this very critical period. I think all of us are going to be looking at the TV in just a couple hours to see what transpires inside the Capitol, since, as you said, it's going to be too cold to have the event outside. And it's a brave new world. So we'll see what happens. Thank you very much for coming to the FCCT.